Hello and welcome to ONEST Explains. This is our new series where I feel this sort of fits the moment that we explain and dive into one issue at a time. And so, as the cover photo already revealed, today we're focusing on the Canada China deal. And the idea is to explain what Prime Minister Carney agreed to, what China promised, and what does come next. And so, of course, I'm referring to Prime Minister Carney visiting China for the first time as the first Prime Minister of Canada in the past 7 years to visit China with a state visit to Beijing, where he met with, as you see here, Xi Jinping, but also other officials of the China's government. And so on January 16th, 2026, Prime Minister Carney announced a new Canada-China strategic partnership after, as I mentioned, meetings in Beijing with President Xi Jinping, Premier Li Qiang, and National People's Congress Chairman Zhao Leiji. So, the idea is to figure out, what did Canada promise and agree to? Now, what did China promise and agree to? So, all of this and this deep dive and explanation is based on facts, on the information provided by Prime Minister Carney's office, also by Beijing and Xi Jinping's office, as well as their press releases, also press briefings, and on video statements. So, I just made sure that everything is factual, that we're not questioning any data. And of course, I have a written format here, so I will be reading it off partially as well. So, question is also, how does this change in China, in Canada's position in the world, what role does it play in the world where its relationship with the United States has become less predictable? So we also will be talking about the so-called new global order that Prime Minister Carney has referred to in one of his statements to press. So we'll dive into that towards the end. So first, let's talk about what just happened, right? And why now? This was Canada's, as I mentioned, first prime ministerial visit to China since 2017. It comes at a moment when Ottawa is openly recalibrating its economic strategy. Why? There is global fragmentation, right? President Trump started calling at this moment, at that time, Prime Minister Trudeau, as Governor Trudeau, he has openly stated that Canada should become a 51st state, which makes absolutely no sense. Then he brought up the idea of fentanyl and the drugs as the precursor for this, then, essentially assaulting Canada and Canadians and their sovereignty with the statements. Then Prime Minister Carney came into play. He is respectful of him. He doesn't call him governor, nor Prime Minister Carney did welcome this type of language. But what we see actually factually, that we're not really moving anywhere along. Plus, this week, President Trump stated that actually the free trade agreement, the so-called CUSMA between Canada, US, and Mexico is less of his priorities. And so he's very much focused on enlarging the territory. Yes, we're talking about Greenland, but we're also talking about Canada. In addition, he also brings up the idea of the Golden Dome. And yes, today, literally today, what is it, January 16th, he brought it up as a reason for acquiring Greenland. Again, illegal, goes against Greenland's sovereignty, is a sovereign state within the Kingdom of Denmark. But again, he brings it up because it's needed for his Golden Dome. But if we think about the Golden Dome, Canada is as much needed. But let's focus on what it is. Altogether, what I'm trying to sort of portray is the situation is very volatile against Canada. It's assaulting Canadians, their sovereignty, their well-being. People are living now for more than a year, just fearing for what comes next, right? From its very dear and near neighbor. And Canadians are very nice neighbors, but essentially we are trying to invade them, or I don't know, annex whatever we're annexing. So altogether, this situation became very old. And so Prime Minister Carney pragmatically thinking, and rightfully so, thinking as to how to benefit Canada. He is representing Canada and Canadians. So what would benefit Canada at this point. And so, in that regard, going to China, then proceeding to the Middle East, he is now actually flying to Qatar, and then he's visiting Saudi Arabia. So he is thinking in terms of how can I benefit my country and do so long term. So Beijing was, as I mentioned, stop number one on this trip, and I will be covering all those stops, not just for our, of course, Canadian watchers and subscribers and readers, but for all of us to understand what does it mean to global politics, but also to United States itself, because that is very much connected. As much as Trump tries to neglect this fact. Now, there's global fragmentation, rising trade weaponization, of course, by the White House and Trump administration, and growing uncertainty in Canada's relationship with its largest trading partner, United States, and its direct neighbor, United States. And if we think about it, I mean, this Trump administration is very focused on hemispheres. And we are on one piece of land with Canada and with Mexico. And I remember President Biden was referring to if, things were to get very wild, we actually have only two neighbors that are directly connected to us. And so at this point, we are trying to intimidate both of them, and hence the results. Now, the message from Ottawa is subtle but unmistakable. Canada is not separating from the United States, but it's no longer comfortable being economically cornered. I would also add it's not just economically, it's also psychologically cornered as well. So, next, the deal in one sentence. Here's the core exchange between Canada and China. Canada opens a controlled lane for Chinese electric vehicles. This has been discussed from October of last year, promised also from October of last year. China lowers barriers on Canadian agri-food exports. We're talking about, of course, oil, but there are more products, and I will list all of them. Both sides rebuild diplomatic, trade, and energy infrastructure around that deal. Everything else supports that central trade-off. So, what did Canada agree to? First, as I mentioned, EV market, right? And this EV market access is the most concrete and immediate from everything that has been agreed to. Canada will allow up to 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles per year into the Canadian market at 6.1% of most favorite nation tariff. Now, that's equivalent to pre-trade friction volumes and less than just 3% of Canada's annual new vehicle market. So it's not that dramatic and traumatic to Canada, but it does, of course, matter to Chinese market as well, or exports. This is the most enforceable part of the deal. It's a domestic policy decision Canada controls. So, investment and affordability. This here is a bit different. It's expected, but it's not guaranteed as of now. Canada expects, but does not guarantee that this EV access will first drive joint venture investment in Canada within 3 years, expand domestic EV and battery supply chains, and support Canadian auto manufacturing jobs. Again, all of those details are based on memorandums, on the official legal documents that were signed between Canada and China. So when I say this is promised, yes, it is legally promised. It's not agreed to. If something is agreed to and there's a timeline and there are all the terms and conditions and signatures, yes, then we, of course, see it as a legitimate commitment. Right? So within 5 years, Ottawa anticipates that over half of imported Chinese EVs under this framework will be affordable models priced at $35,000. Important distinction. These are expectations, not binding obligations, right? So as to energy, this is a major but quieter pillar. Not as much discussed in the news. Energy is a central and often overlooked part of this partnership. Canada and China agreed to deepen cooperation in, first, clean energy, then energy storage, conventional energy, and critical minerals. And this is, again, critical, pun intended. if you think about United States with critical minerals, this is the driver, right? And the reason to get into Ukraine, get into Greenland, get into, so far as, Latin America. But here, this is a very quiet exchange, but this is something that Canada and China have agreed to. Prime Minister Carney has stated that by 2030, Canada will produce 50 million tons of LNG annually, all destined for Asian markets. He stated it quite openly today in the press briefing. So this is a commitment. Now, yes, it is a sort of a plan for the near future. The figures will be growing, year after year, but this is the intention here. This matters because it signals, first, long-term energy alignment with Asia, diversification away from single market dependence, and Canada positioning itself as a stable energy supplier in a volatile world, right? Because it's very difficult, at least in the United States, to predict what will happen even a week from now or even a day from now. But here, this agreement sort of fits the China's rhetoric. China plans long term. They're not planning for immediate wins, as opposed to, let's say, Trump administration that rushes to declare something a deal or declare an attack successful, right? So here China chooses a very different approach, and this is where Prime Minister Carney, right, representing Canada, does meet Chinese expectations and also intentions. Now, structural reset, rebuilding the relationships, plumbing, right? Because what I mentioned, it's the first prime minister to visit, Canadian prime minister to visit China since 2017. So Canada also agreed to revive and expand first the economic and financial strategic dialogue. This is so-called EFSD. This is what they've been signing, if you saw the videos and photos of it. A renewed Joint Economic and Trade Commission, referred to as JETC, a new ministerial energy dialogue, and multiple MOU, Memorandum of Understanding on energy, law enforcement, food safety, culture, and tourism. So these mechanisms don't force outcomes, but without them, nothing durable happens. So this is what I refer to as plumbing, right? When it comes to this connection between Canada and China. So they have to build up from the fundamental basis. Now, what China agreed to. First, canola tariffs, right? I mentioned canola oil earlier. This was one of the most important factors, specifically for Canada. It brings a lot of income here. So canola tariffs, the clearest testable win, right? As much as to compare it to EVs for China, getting into Canadian market, this is Canada getting into Chinese market here. So by March 1st, 2026, China is expected to lower tariffs on Canadian canola seed from about 85% to roughly 15%. If this happens on schedule, it is the most immediate and measurable gain of the deal, right? We're talking about canola seed, Canadian canola seed. Temporary relief on other exports. From March 1st, 2026 until at least the end of the year, China is expected to suspend punitive tariffs on canola meal, lobsters, crabs, and peas. So the wording matters here. The relief is temporary, not permanent. Let me repeat, from March 1st, 2026 of this year until at least the end of this year. So China does reserve the right to extend the deal, change it, quit it, right? So based on the circumstances. So then I mentioned tourism. There's visa-free travel and people-to-people ties. So President Xi committed to introducing visa-free access for Canadians traveling to China, which is huge. Because think about it, Canadians have played such a big role in America's tourism, right? We're direct neighbors, and so many, travel to Florida over the winter to enjoy the time there, perhaps even had property there as well. Of course, visiting New York and small and big and all the cities in between. But since our weird, put it this way, type of relationship from the beginning of last year, plus also this visa restrictions, and people are, watching the news where it is documented how folks are searched, and crossing the border and whatnot. So it does not look as appealing, even though we do have FIFA World Cup, we do have a late 28 Olympic Games. But that aside, they will be traveling somewhere. So China is now opening the doors and the borders, right, for visa-free travel. Details are still pending, but politically that signals a desire to normalize exchanges after years of strain. Now, there's financial cooperation as well. So both sides agreed to establish a financial working group. Why is it important? Because there you have direct contact. They extend also and amend the RMB Canadian dollar currency swap arrangement between central banks. Also huge, also falls into Prime Minister Carney's idea of stabilization and stabilization of this long-term partnership. And of course, him dealing with central banks prior is the key here. So this doesn't increase trade overnight, but it signals predictability and confidence at the macro level, not micro, macro level. So now, finally, security, law enforcement, and red lines. So Canada and China also agreed to pragmatic cooperation on, first, transnational crime, narcotics trafficking, because we know fentanyl, we know, but the White House states differently. But synthetic drugs come from China, go through Canada. There's demand in U.S., so they come to U.S., but nobody talks about demand at this point. We're just using this as a precursor to connect it to national security and sort of get into other countries' resources, right? But here they agreed to collaborate on transnational crime, narcotics trafficking, cybercrime, money laundering, opposition, right? They're not cooperating on crime, they're cooperating on, reducing it and ultimately aiming to eliminate it. This includes the Memorandum of Understanding between RCMP and China's Ministry of Public Security. So this is one of the most sensitive parts of the deal. Operationally useful, politically risky, United States won't really like it, and closely watched by Canada's security community. So now, what Canada reaffirmed, right? So this is quiet, but even though important. Canada reaffirmed its One China policy, a long-standing position, but only explicitly restated in this context. Both sides are also emphasized commitment to multilateralism, very important, something that the White House opposes as of as of last year and this year, where they put it officially in the national security strategy, right? They both agreed to support United Nations and WTO. Again, very different from what the White House sees. Cooperation, they agreed to cooperate on global governance, climate, and financial stability. So Canada welcomed China's 2026 APEC presidency, and China supported Canada's bid to host APEC in 2029. Also, long-term planning fits China's perspective, so Carney meets them where their interests come close. Now, this is about rules-based order, not alignment. They're not aligning, right? Their visions or agreeing on everything, and Prime Minister Carney openly stated it. We're collaborating with those who are profitable to us, who are profitable to them. We see common ground here. It doesn't mean that we're aligning and we're agreeing on everything, but they agree to collaborate, or at least begin the discussions. Now, promise versus reality, how to tell if this works. And so I suggest to think about it in 3 layers. So first layer, March 1st, 2026. Right? Comes very soon. So do canola tariffs actually fall? Temporary tariff suspensions implemented? If not, the deal weakens immediately, right? So this is your first sign as to how, China meets what it promises. Now, layer 2, institutional follow through. Do trade, finance, and energy dialogues meet? Do those memorandum of understandings produce real cooperation? No meetings means no momentum. So I mentioned here, there's a financial group that has been established. Are they meeting? Are they progressing? And finally, third layer is joint ventures announced, facilities built, right? Do EV prices actually change for consumers, right? Are Canadians involved economically in that venture as well? So this is the hardest and most uncertain layer. So time will tell. Now, why this matters geopolitically? And this is important here as well. So Prime Minister Carney said that this partnership positions Canada for a new world order. This is what he said.
I believe the progress that we have made in the partnership sets us up well for the new world order.
So explained, it means economic resilience is now national security, right? To put it out point blank. Canada is not replacing United States, but it's signaling that exclusive dependence is no longer acceptable. Why? Because Canada waited for too long, or actually long enough, to see if whatever the Trump administration has put out will be faced from some internal opposition in Congress or whatever. Will there be any changes? And so they see US really going one way with no obstruction. So yeah, they have to maneuver. So now their economic stability is part of national security. So China gains predictability with G7 economy, right? Very strong economy. And now Canada gains options if it manages the risks. Now, benefits and risks for Canada. So benefits are quite obvious: immediate relief for agricultural exporters, potential downward pressure on EV prices, long-term energy positioning in Asia, right? We're planning as far as 2030. Long-term uh, strategic flexibility, right? So it's a greater strategic flexibility if you have reliable partners in China. You're not very much dependent on the United States, and you can survive at least and progress within the next 3 years. So what are the risks? US backlash, right? So Trump won't like it. Trade, industrial policy, rules of origin. What will the White House say? And it matters because, again, we're direct neighbors. Domestic concerns over manufacturing jobs, right? This is something to follow within Canada, right? Security and interference sensitivities, and replacing one dependency with another, right? We have to also state the obvious. Yes, you have a very tough choice and you had to choose, and you did. Now, let's see how safe this could be, and then it will depends really on the fine print, so to speak, what the Carney administration will put together. So again, what to watch next? Four things: March 1st in terms of tariffs, 2026 EV flows and prices, also 26 to 28 energy and joint venture investment, and the US response. This is important to watch as well. So this is not a rupture with the West. It's not a pivot to China. It's a hedge against instability, right? So some things are certain, some things are still in the planning. So we'll have to see and follow up how this will go. It tells us something really important. Canada is no longer waiting for certainty. It's building options. It's building options by joining the SAFE program with the European Union, by now having long-term plans of trade and collaboration with China as well. They didn't invent it, they were forced to do it. So now, my other question is, I also did a deep dive on Greenland. I put it out publicly. It's available. So please go ahead and watch it. Greenland, Trump's national security priority: what's real, what's manufactured, what's dangerous, how it does connect to NATO. And another is that I also put this deep dive in written format. So it is now available on our website, honestnetwork.com. It's pinned in the comment and also is in the description of this episode. So you can go ahead and read it. I know some folks are visual. I'm one of you, so I need to read it to fully understand it. So now you have both options. And another thing, you see this little link here. So if you like to go deeper with Honest Plus, those are deep dives. It gives you access to long form deep dives and off the record briefings. One time a month, we're meeting on Google Meet where you can ask me questions. The QR code is on the screen. It's also in the pinned comment, and it's also in the description of this episode if you want to join this small, close community of like-minded people. All right. So thank you again for watching. I will be back with more explained, Honest Explained episodes, if you will, and deep dives. So again, as I always say, keep your head on a swivel. Please consume actual news and stay well. Turbulent times, but we'll make it through. Thank you for being here.